I'm leaving it to you now to take care of the waiting room. I'll be beginning the session now. So all those who are co-hosts, please make sure that you take care of the waiting room. Thank you. All right, guys, thank you for joining in. It's great to have you all here. We have a strong 67 here, and we look to have more delegates as the time goes. My name is Jaideep Singh, and I'm the Secretary General of the MUN at Home program. And I welcome you all to our first guest speaker session for round 6, which is going to be on SDG 16.3, that is ensuring equal rule of law and equal access to justice for all. And today we have a very special speaker with us. We have someone who's been associated with the board of directors at MUN Impact for very long. He himself is a board of director now, and he started off as an MUN delegate himself, and he inspires all of us here at MUN Impact because now he has gone on from his journey as an MUN delegate to work as a consultant at the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. I'm talking about Kudzai Mukaratirwa. He joins us from Nigeria, I believe, and Nairobi, sorry, I believe. And I'm glad to welcome him here today. Thank you, Kudzai, and it's all yours. He's going to talk to us today about his journey. He's going to talk how he started off as an MUN delegate and now he works as a consultant at the UNODC, and how we can learn from his journey in our careers in the future. And as delegates, when we come up with solutions in this round, he's going to talk about SDG 16.3 as well. So Kudzai, it's all yours. Thank you for joining in, and over to you. After your talk, we'll be going into questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Jaideep. I really appreciate it. And thank you for saying my name perfectly. That's a rare occurrence. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening to everyone, depending where you are in terms of time zone. My name is Kudzai, and I work currently for the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime Regional Program for East Africa. And I started off, like many of you, as an MUN delegate, then an online MUN delegate and staff. And after a few years of hard work and interesting experiences, I am here now working for the UNODC. I'm going to share a bit about my journey, as Jaideep requested me to, about where I started, how I got there, and on the question of the rule of law and equal access to justice under SDG target 16.3. So firstly, my curiosity in MUN started when I was 17 years old. I'd never heard of MUN, and it suddenly joined our school, and I was like, okay, let me see what this is all about, you know? So I joined the MUN club at my school, and I was like, wow, this is something like that I've always been looking for, but never knew it was there. And from there, it was kind of like a boulder rolling down a hill, just started gaining momentum. I became the Secretary General of my school's MUN club. And we were quite a young club. We'd only been to one conference in 2011, and then in Johannesburg, OMUN. And then after that, our second conference was in Dubai at Dubai Academy International United Nations. And we were so nervous preparing. We were like a delegation of 9. Most of us with zero international experience. And I was like looking through all the schools from around the world and how much experience they had. And I was like, okay, we can't embarrass ourselves. So we prepared accordingly, and we went there and had a very successful conference. I'm not one who cares much about awards, but our delegation won quite a few awards, I think in 5 or 6 committees. And we didn't even know there were awards at the beginning of the conference, funny enough. We found out at the end, and we were all surprised. And I won Best Delegate for that conference, which I didn't even know what Best Delegate was at all. But I think that like sparked my interest to, you know, push in this further. And that's how I met Lisa and started working with Online Model United Nations. And I was like, okay, more young people need access to MUN, and not just for the educational aspect, but for the personal development aspect, like to develop who you are as a person, to expose yourself to different cultures, challenges, and experiences. And for this to be accessible and equally accessible. I mean, Zimbabwe is not a very rich country, so a lot of the MUN outreach programs we did were with very low income schools, but had the exact same impact it would have for people from middle to high income countries. And I saw the power and potential of MUN. I was like, okay, we need to expand this. And that's the platform OMUN provided for me, to provide free access to Model United Nations, as well as working with the leadership team. I managed to grow and see the different avenues and how dynamic MUN is as a tool. I think in those years, MUN was more, I wouldn't say static, but more binary. It was about preparing for conferences, writing your resolutions, trying to win some awards, preparing your CV for university. But what I realized is it's deeper than that. And if you make the effort to dig a little deeper, it can take you to some amazing places. So while I was in university, I was more active on OMUN, and I joined UNASA, the United Nations Association of South Africa. Fun fact, most countries around the world at universities have a UNA, which is a United Nations Association within the university. And I'd encourage all of you guys to join it or just check it out. It's a great platform to gain more opportunities and exposure to the kind of work you can do as a student towards international relations and international development and diplomacy. And then from there, I went to my first QLC in Qatar. And that's when I met Lisa for the first time after working online together for several years. And that was amazing. It was my first international conference where I presented at a workshop, and it really gave me the confidence and reassurance that I was doing the right thing. And this is my passion, first of all, and as well as my strength and skill set. And as I grew throughout university, I realized a lot of things about my own personal development. I mentioned many of them in my talk at the MUN Impact Global Virtual Conference, so I won't repeat that part. But some key things were, one, your personal development in terms of challenging yourself, looking at finding out, first of all, what are you passionate about? And then having the courage to explore that, even though people may not think that this is aligned to you, or things may seem like uncertain or not going well at the beginning. Trust me, it's a very long journey. And as young people, you've got nothing but time. Time to learn, time to experience, time to make mistakes, and time to overcome challenges and succeed as well. What you must always remember is that you're not in a rush. As long as you care about it, that issue will always be there, and you always have the opportunity to work on it and build. So from Qatar Leadership Conference, I went into my final year of university, and I was wondering, what am I going to do with my life? Like, what do I really want to do? And I realized I want to learn more about international development and working on issues I care about. Many are linked to gender equality, education, youth empowerment, youth development, as well as human rights, the rule of law, access to justice. I personally studied law and French with a special focus on human rights and international law and the rights of refugees. And then I finished university. I was like, what do I actually know about these things? And what do I actually know about the world? So I spent 6 months traveling and working for OMUN and trying to figure out my life. And during this time, I was offered to come to the UNODC as an expert advisor in Vienna in 2017. And given the chance to give a presentation on Online Mod United Nations for about 5 minutes. And this was mind blowing because I hadn't even turned 23 years old yet. I was one of the youngest experts in the room because they had regional experts, and I was the regional expert for Africa. So I could say for most people, besides Salam and someone else, I was the youngest in the room by like 10 to 25 years. So you can imagine how intimidating that could have been. But the conference was a success, and I loved the program, and I wanted to find out what more could I do. And I spent most of the expert group meeting actually listening. Besides the presentation, I made a few contributions, but I was listening, writing tons of notes and ideas about how like this can be implemented and how these parts can be fine-tuned. And then I wrote a review mechanism for them for the global program under Education for Justice to be tested out at MUN conferences. And I also contacted one of the MUN Impact partners called HELA, Hope for Education and Leadership in Afghanistan. And we piloted some UNODC E4J MUN topics and simulations, which went great. And I did this with the help of Lisa and Hila, but it was all out of our own initiative. The UN never requested us to do this, or we weren't paid or anything. It was purely out of passion to see that there's a project that can help a lot of people learn more about the topics of rule of law, access to justice, human trafficking, cybercrime, firearms and light weapons, preventing violent extremism, etc., etc. So we all saw the potential that this had, and that's what kind of carried me through. And then I went back to Zimbabwe. I remember I arrived on the 1st of June in Zimbabwe, And I spent those 2 months just contacting organizations, speaking with my friends and parents, finding out people who work about people who work in international development, from ambassadors to program officers to national coordinators. And I'll just call them and ask, do you guys want to meet for a coffee or something? And then we just sit and talk and like throw questions back and forth. And I'll be like, oh, I want to do this with my life. And what do you think? And this and that. And eventually that led to me getting an internship with the Legal Resources Foundation in Zimbabwe. And I was working as a legal researcher and advocacy officer. And this was a huge learning curve for me because I was working with civil society at the grassroots level. And the way it often works is they're development agencies and they run some programs, but they often give funding. And these often go to the UN, civil societies, and other NGOs. And sometimes the UN has its own money and it gives them to the grassroots organizations to implement. So I was at the bottom of the chain, so to speak. And I had a great opportunity to work and evaluate programs on a very grassroots level, working with actual people face to face, as well as doing a lot of research and learning how advocacy works. Because a lot of people are like, oh, advocacy, this and that, like it doesn't really get the job done. But if you're consistent and the quality of your advocacy is very strategic and targeted, it can have a huge impact. One of the projects I worked on for 9 months was amending municipal bylaws in our capital city to prevent gender-based violence in public spaces, especially public transport, because the ripple effect of this, I learned this during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence when I was working closely with a number of NGOs, is access to education, especially for women, was affected by gender-based violence in the public transport system. Young girls and women weren't able to go to school or even finish their university courses just because the public transport system wasn't safe for them. And I took 9 months of research, advocacy campaigns to get this bill moved to Parliament. And as I left Zimbabwe, it was being debated in Parliament to be adopted. I need to follow up on that and see if it actually happened. But this is an example of how advocacy and research work, as well as like how you can tie in several things you're passionate about. I mean, I love legal work. I love the rule of law. I'm passionate about gender equality, public policy, and research. And I was able to tie in all these small things together with the guidance as well of my boss and my supervisor. They were amazing the whole time. I'd make a lot of mistakes. I spent a lot of time because a lot of our work, a lot of the legislation is not online. So I'd have to get to work, do a bit of work, go to the city council, get all the legislation, come back to work, make photocopies of it, go back, drop it off, do the research, and then realize, okay, I forgot this one page, or I need this part of the law. And it was a lot of effort, but I also learned a lot in the process. And that if you want to do high quality work, you have to be willing to sacrifice a lot of time and effort, because when there's a problem that hasn't been fixed, it's because someone hasn't made the right efforts and been as attentive to the details to make change happen and to start the process of change. And then after my time at the Legal Resources Foundation, I was still working with OMUN, so I was juggling a lot of balls. The following year, 2018, I returned to the UNODC for a global workshop on education for justice and how the program would be implemented at a primary level, secondary level, and tertiary level. And this is a testament to what happened at the first expert group meeting and my contributions as such a young person. They saw the value and quality of my work and invited me again. And that was amazing. Again, I got another opportunity to work with them and see how is this. So I was working at a global policy level, and policy is just this buzzword, but when you understand the policy, you can have a greater impact on the implementation phase, as well as designing policy in the future. I mean, one of my biggest frustrations at work sometimes is people who are very policy orientated. They've never been in the field. They've never implemented a project. They don't know who the faces or the challenges that the stakeholders go through. They just think, okay, I've studied my bachelor's, I've done my master's, I must be a public policy expert by now. I've done a great thesis. And I think I can write a policy that will help people I've never met living in circumstances I have no idea about. But that's not how it works in terms of being an expert in the field of development or any other field, I think. I think you really have to get your hands and your feet dirty, but that makes you the ideal professional. So from there, I had the idea to expand the E4J project through the Blue Heart project, which you can see behind me. And I found out about the Blue Heart project, I think through a flyer I saw while I was at the UNODC. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. Like human trafficking is a mandate area of E4J. The Blue Heart project needs a more youth element. So I was wondering, okay, what's the best way to engage young people on human trafficking, and which regions is it most active? And I did some research and I saw it was Ethiopia. So I reached out to UNODC in Ethiopia, and and I looked at the projects and the programs they were doing, and I sent them an email, and I was like, hey, my name is Kudzai. I've been working with E4J, and I've got a great idea in mind, and I'd already designed the project already. I was like, okay, I can see these are your focus areas, but if you want to engage the youth more, you should target them through art, the medium of art, especially for a sensitive topic like human trafficking, where there's so much policy work and research and all of that, but to translate a message to be understood not only by people who read policy, but by families and households and communities and their sons and daughters and cousins and aunts and uncles, I found out that art is a powerful tool to do that. So we held an art exhibition in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I organized all of this from my laptop in Zimbabwe with the support of the BMM, Better Migration Management Initiative, which is a consortium of NGOs and international development agencies who came to the school. They had speakers, they had the art exhibition, as well as they got a chance to speak with the experts on what work is actually being done in their country on human trafficking and how can youth be involved and support this. And this is just like a simple example of taking a problem, taking your time to understand it, and finding out what are the most strategic areas you can position yourself to, one, help solve the problem, as well as two, support the work that the UN is already doing. I mean, once I started working for the UN more full time, I realized we often don't have time to focus on everything. As well as when people come with proposals to us, they're often really not prepared. It's like, oh, I have an idea, wouldn't this be great? But if you come with an entirely complete idea, you understand exactly where they're working. And you're like, and yes, and you tell them, I want to do something that will make your job easier, they're often much more welcoming and open you with welcome arms, because they can see the value of this partnership. So yeah, to fast forward from there, I used a lot of my skills from MUN, which is something some of you may be wondering, especially in terms of diplomacy, cultural understanding. I mean, I'm all about communication. How you talk to people, how you treat people can take you very far in life, as well as learning languages, cultural nuances of respect. And you realize we're all very different. And I work with very, very different people, some very conservative, some very liberal, some very philosophical, some very traditional. And I love it. Like I know how to speak to each one of them. I know how to act in different environments. I know how to use language as well to break certain barriers in communication, in negotiation, in creating partnerships. And I think this is one of the skills I wasn't taught in schools, is understand where the other person is coming from. Put your feet in their shoes and use that as your point of departure. Because you can often have very strong opinions when you do MUN and you're negotiating something that's very important or sensitive, but having this ability and developing this knack of putting yourself in other people's shoes, as well as understanding your values and principles and showing the things you aren't willing to compromise on, I think goes a very long way, especially if you want to go in diplomacy. Um, yeah, and then from there, I carried on working in Zimbabwe until the end of 2018. At the beginning of 2019, I went to South Africa in February to start my master's in environmental law. And during this time, again, the UNODC invited me to be a guest speaker at the African Youth Commission in Gambia. And again, like all of this, I never asked for, I never applied for anything. I just found this project great, and whenever the UN needed help or I could see they were missing out on areas, I would take the initiative to design something and say, is this okay with you that I do this? And, to promote the work that you're doing and also spread awareness, give visibility, and also give other young people a chance to engage in this. And through this, I was invited to, Gambia. And then that's where I met my supervisor, but I didn't know she'd be my supervisor, but we got along so well at the conference. We connected instantly and we understood each other and we were both passionate about the same things. And then she was like, oh, I'd love for you to come and work for me. And I told her, oh, anytime, just send me an email. Then the following month, I met her and her boss in New York at the UN Youth Summit, and that was an amazing experience. Again, I got to attend the largest youth conference in the world held by the UN, followed by the UN for UN for MUN Summit, where I got a chance to chair with the Secretary General of the United Nations, of which I had never planned. I didn't even know this. I was told I arrived in New York on a Sunday, and on a Wednesday afternoon, I was told, oh, our moderator is not available. On Friday, can you moderate this entire global summit with the Secretary General of the UN Youth Envoy, and we need you to make a speech by tomorrow morning. And I was like, what? That was, yeah, so it took a lot to take that in. And then the next morning I wrote my speech, I prepared, I went in for the protocol and the training. And the next day I was moderating the conference, and it was quite a success and quite an amazing opportunity that led to so much more. I spent the next month or two in South Africa. Then I went to do a summer school in Norway. And while I was in that summer school in July, is everything okay?
Yeah, all good. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. Okay, I'm almost at 25 minutes, so I'll wrap up. Yeah, I am in July. I got a phone call while I was in Norway, Oslo, at the International Summer School of the University of Oslo, which I recommend all of you to apply for. It's a really amazing summer school, 6 weeks long, changed my life. It's got like 150 scholarships for students from developing countries. And I lived with 400 people from 87 countries, age 18 to 62. So yeah, during that time, I got a call in July. Hi, Kudzai, it's one boy who's my current supervisor. Hello? Is everything okay?
Now.
Yes, please go ahead, and I'll take care of this.
Okay, no problem. The name of the school is, if you Google ISS, University of Oslo, International Summer School, University of Oslo. So after this, I got a call from my current supervisor, and she was like, hey, Kudzai, are you free next month? And I was like, yeah, I'm free. I can make some time, because I was studying part-time anyway. And I went to Kenya. I've never been to Kenya, and going to East Africa anytime soon. And I was given a 10-day contract, and they really loved working with me and extended this contract to 3 weeks, and then to the end of the year, and then into 2020, and then into next year. So I left my master's in the middle of it. I've just done the first year, but these are kind of opportunities that arose literally starting from my first time doing MUN when I was 17 years old, from recognizing the things I was passionate about, also understanding the skills I needed to develop to become an expert in my field. I look up to a lot of people in my field in terms of how I want to be. So I look at someone doing something I want to be doing, and then I look for the person who's doing it the best, and certain aspects I like how they do their work, and I adopt those, and I work very hard at perfecting them. Oh, it's kind of laggy. Okay, I'll try and speak slower. Yeah, so I work very hard at perfecting what I want to do, and also setting myself goals while I do this, so that I can look back at each previous year and say, okay, I've done better than the last year. I mean, when I first traveled in 2013 as a student, I was like, okay, this year I went to one new country. Next year I made it two. And I had to pay for all this myself. And sometimes I didn't have to pay, like opportunities like LC came up, being invited to Gambia, New York, etc., etc. But I knew that at the end of the year, if I accomplish these goals, I've been successful. And I can build on that, kind of going higher and higher and higher. So that's what I encourage a lot of you to do, and to start really small. I mean, I started with one country, and then built up to two, and saving up, improving my expertise in different languages, my understanding of different cultures and regions. I had really little understanding of East, West, and East, West, and North African culture. But after 3 or 4 years, that grew, and you can do that. Oh, is everything okay? I think someone's mic is on.
It's
Anyway,
fine.
Alexa,
Okay.
can you sing the song?
And then, yeah,
Alexa.
to sum it up, what I can say is where I am now today is not as the result of chance or luck or getting the right grades or doing the right club or winning enough awards, but it's more taking the time to understand myself as a person and what I care about, making the effort to develop my understanding of the things I care about and how I can go about them, and also having the humility to learn from others, whether someone's older or younger than you, more experienced. There's always something you can learn, and then growing certainty and confidence. I think that's the most challenging part for many people, where you're willing to take on something that you've never done before, that has a lot of responsibility, that can go terribly wrong. But if you believe in yourself enough, it can go really well. Yeah, so that's a summary from me.
Thank you, Kudzai, for that really inspiring, really inspiring talk. I hope all of us are really inspired. Virtual round of applause for Kudzai. It really helps to hear experiences from people who have been in our position before, and it inspires us to become something in the future, learning from your experiences and implementing them in our own lives in the future. So with that, thank you, Kudzai. Let's now go into our question and answer session. I have muted all participants. So if you wish to ask your question, you need to ask me for permission to unmute yourself. Thank you. Let's now go on to our question session, and we have questions on the chat. I'll call out your name. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. The first question is from Alina. I'm taking this question because this has been repeated by several delegates in different forms, but I'm just going to take one person to ask that question. Alina, go ahead.
Yes, hi, your story is very inspiring. Thank you for talking to us. So I wanted to ask, how was your preparation towards the UN? Like, if we want to work in the UN, we look forward. So I've heard that there are courses like, there are exams like International Civil Service, and you can have an internship program. So how do we prepare ourselves to work in the UN in the future?
In the future, it depends, because the UN is a very big organism that's very dynamic. So whether you're an engineer or a lawyer, a translator, a monitoring and evaluation specialist, a gender specialist, you have to first find out which agency is the right one for you. Because even in the UNODC, we have a global health program. We've got people working with the substance abuse, preventing the spread of HIV, et cetera, but there are people also doing that with UNICEF and World Health Organization and UNDP. So I think the first part is finding the agency that aligns with what you want. I mean, UNOPS, which is United Nations Operational Services, specializes in building infrastructure. That goes to designing bridges, designing refugee camps, designing schools, and this kind of development. So find the agency that suits the skill sets you're looking to develop. And then in terms of, I had my first UN internship when I was 20, during my second year of university. And this is because of the work I did with OMUN, as well as the quality of my research work. And I was doing my internship as a second year undergrad. Everyone else either had finished their bachelor's, had a master's, or a PhD. So it's more about setting yourself up as the prime candidate for this position they're advertising. And then in terms of the different positions you can take in the UN, once you've either graduated or had some work experience, I mean, there's the YPP, which is the Young Professionals Program. And this is very rotational. So the purpose of this program is to get underrepresented member states inside the UN. So each second year, they take a new enrollment, and there's certain requirements. I believe you need a bachelor's, a master's, and 2 years work experience, but you can double check that online. And then it's open to certain countries. So when they see certain countries underrepresented, they open the position so that they can apply. And it's a 2-year program that often leads to you being taken on as permanent staff. I currently work as a consultant, and that's a different class of staff. We've got consultants and individual contractors, which are brought on board to work on specific projects, but they aren't permanent staff. And then, after that, we've got UNVs, which is UN volunteers. This is a paid position where you're hired as an expert. You can do this, I think, from the age of 20 to 35. And there are different requirements. You can be a national UN volunteer or you can be an international UN volunteer.
Hello.
This is a really
Yes, sir.
good
I
position.
have
It has less pay, but it's got more benefits in terms of you're covered by the UN in terms of insurance. You're considered as a part of the staff system. You get certain benefits as well. And it's a really good career path to get what we call a P position, which is permanent staff, which starts at P1 to P5. And then from there, you've got your D positions, which are director level. That's D1 to D3, if I remember correctly. And yeah, these are the different tiers. And it can be a very tricky process, but one thing that can guarantee your success is be the best at what you do. Like my expertise is in youth programs, and even my boss says, I know I can't hire anyone better than you to do youth programs in the region. And that's why I want to keep you. And that's how you grow in the UN system, because they're looking for very strong, very competent people who also have a degree of emotional intelligence and ability to work well with others. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for the question, Alina. Let's now go on to a question coming in from Marwan. Marwan?
Thank you, JD. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the very insightful and thoughtful series. It was very interesting. So my question has to do with, obviously, you being a former MUNer and obviously working in OMUN and also being a law student, you've learned a lot of various skills that are helpful in international relations. So my question is, how did you use those skills? Because obviously working in the United Nations, you need a set of experience, whether it's years or a university degree. So how did you manage to surpass that as a young person by using those skills?
Oh, okay, that's a very interesting question, which I really like. Okay, so I can start with saying the skills I learned in terms of technical writing. Technical writing is a highly desired skill within the UN and most organizations, whether it's private or public sector. And I learned this by first doing the first ever OMUN fundraiser to raise money for the organization to continue its operations and give stipends for its staff. So I had to learn how to write a document that would encourage other people to do things. And it was a success. And I was like, okay, I kind of like this. Then my second opportunity was to write a proposal for our university UNASA club to get funding for MUN and a few other projects. And this club had not received funding in 4 years, despite various efforts. And that's when I saw my skill for technical writing had developed. And I was getting good at it, and I understood how to structure things in a way that makes something seem like the idea and the concept come out very clearly, and the feasibility are very understandable. And then from there, I took this skill and I applied this skill the first time I went as an expert advisor to the UNODC in Vienna to design the review mechanism for their implementation of the Education for Justice program in MUN. And no one had even thought about designing a review mechanism or how they'll evaluate the success and impact on students at a conference. So that's one example of one skill I used. And then another one is in terms of networking. I love networking, but not in the traditional sense where people are like, oh yeah, like this person's good at this, so I'm gonna make sure I'm friends with them. For me, it's more organic in terms of the colleagues who've become friends, who I first met like in a very professional capacity. Like I'd been invited to the conference and we just started talking about life, and I like asking them beyond where they're from, where they grew up, what kind of childhood someone had, where they studied, etc., etc. So taking the time to get to know people personally in a professional environment is a really important skill. And it's not very easy because people don't open up. But the more I understood what people from the Far East are like, because I work with a lot of people from India. I lived in Durban, which is the largest population of India outside of India. So I really like working with people from India, from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Zimbabwe is a former British colony as well. So there are like lots of levels to relate on. And then when I started working with South American colleagues, I realized I don't know much about South America. So that's what I'd ask them and see like if we have any mutual avenues of relation in terms of how we grew up, what our countries were like, what the people are like. And when this kind of trust and understanding builds, as well as perspective sharing in terms of how I see the world and how they see the world and what shaped us in terms of the way we see the world, this skill also helped me to get more opportunities, for people to recommend me for opportunities, and it made it very easy for them to work with me. And as a result, they wanted to continue working with me. So I hope that answers your question, Marwan, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Marwan. I think Marwan is no longer in the meeting, but
Yeah,
yes,
hello.
thank you for the question.
Hello.
And let's now go into another question from Amaya. Amaya joins us from Cohort 2, I believe. Amaya, please ask your
Please
first question.
unmute yourself and give the feedback.
Sorry,
Yes?
can you hear me?
Yes, Amaya, please ask your previous question, the first one you asked.
Excuse me, is it the one about the maritime crimes?
Yes, yes.
So nice to meet you. And so my question is, I want to know that I'm from Sri Lanka, and being an island surrounded by ocean, Sri Lanka now has been a major hub for most of the maritime crimes in the Indian Ocean. And in the previous month, the UNODC has conducted a search to tackle those maritime crimes in Sri Lanka, in the Trincomalee Harbour in Sri Lanka. So as an experienced member of the UNODC, can you please suggest any more solutions for this issue? Because as citizens of Sri Lanka, we have been experiencing major maritime crimes for over like 2 and 3 years. So I would like you to suggest any solutions for this.
Thank you so much, Amaya, for that question. It's pretty interesting because the headquarters, so in the UNODC, we've got different pillars. We've got the Global Health Program, wildlife crimes, wildlife and forest crimes, as well as Container Control Program, the Criminal Justice Program, which is the one I work for under the youth program. Then you've got the Global Maritime Crime Program and the Transnational Organized Crime Program. So I'm not a specific expert in global maritime crime, but a lot of my colleagues who work here also work with the Sri Lanka and Bangladesh office. So the way the UNODC works is it's divided up the oceans in terms of how it operates in tackling maritime crime. So we've got the Indian Ocean Office region. And what's going on in Sri Lanka, from what I've seen, if you go on the UNODC website and you'll see the different pillars, and you go under global maritime crime. They've been working really closely with training law enforcement in terms of how to detect and investigate maritime crimes, which is a skill set that was lacking, and which is why a lot of these maritime crimes could happen, because the law enforcement didn't know how to investigate them. So building the capacity of law enforcement, first of all, and then secondly, tackling the judicial system and working with the judiciary in terms of how do you now prosecute? What kind of evidence needs to be brought up? How do you avoid people bribing witnesses and evidence disappearing? Right? So in this way, you've got a strong state security system that can detect and find and investigate global maritime crime, as well as a strong judiciary system that can prosecute them. And that can often be a strong deterrent. And then the third one is, prisoner rehabilitation as well. Because a lot of these maritime crimes, if you serve a short sentence and you aren't rehabilitated, you will just return to become a reoffender. And this promotes recidivism, which is something we try and tackle. So while they also work within the prison system to find out, one, how the maritime crime systems are operating, but two, how to rehabilitate people in such a way that they can be reintegrated into society and not become reoffenders. So the website can give you a lot more details about specific operations and reports, as well as progress made. But yeah, that's a general overview from my end.
Thank you for the question, Amaya. Let's go to Shruti, who joins us from Cohort 1, whose question is on the field of justice and its relations to health and poverty. So Shruti, go ahead.
Yes, so as you have been working in the field of justice for every individual, what do you think, how does health, poverty and inequality have effects on justice?
Sorry, health, poverty and inequality. That's a great question. So access to justice is something I worked on in Zimbabwe for quite a while, and I realized that just because the country has a judicial system, it has courts, it has judges, it has police officers, it has prosecutors, doesn't mean there's access to justice for everyone. So I'll give you an example of some of the legal aid work we did and why I love working with legal aid organizations. Let's say health, for example. In our court system in Zimbabwe, it's not mandatory for any judge to know how to speak like sign language. It's not mandatory for any courtroom to be wheelchair accessible or friendly, as well as hospital. Private hospitals can do it, but government hospitals aren't by law because they don't have to spend the money to do that. And then police, especially victim-friendly units, aren't trained in dealing with victims with disabilities such as visual or hearing impairment. So as an individual, Shruti, let's say you are deaf and you've been the victim of a crime and you arrive at a police station and you're trying to report it and the police officers don't speak sign language. Hello, is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine. Please continue.
Okay, yeah, let's say you're a person who's got a hearing impairment and you want to access justice for a crime or an offense that's been committed against you. Your first port of and now, pardon?
Your audio is breaking.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's fine now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so your access to justice is limited. And once you're within the court system, if your court-assigned prosecutor also is not aware and sensitive to working with people with disabilities, you get discouraged in the end. I've seen many people give up because the court system doesn't allow for them to easily access this. And this is a health issue and a rights issue. But a second one I can give you is remoteness. So communities that aren't in close proximity to justice facilities, to courts, to police stations, often don't get access to justice. There was this one case where we worked at a very remote village that had a river you had to cross. And there was a case of child marriage, and the grandmother of that child wanted to prosecute this person because it's been criminalized in Zimbabwe. But she could not access the courts for 6 months because she didn't have enough money to pay someone to push her from the village, help her cross the river, get to the court, get to the side of the road, get transport, get to the police office, report this, and pay for the transport for the person who's taking her. And then once she's filed the report, come all the way back to the village and then go back, get the necessary court documents, etc., etc. And this is now a question of distance and remoteness, and you can't access justice if it's not near you. And if you've got an underlying health issue that the court system is not willing to accommodate, that affects it. And then poverty is the other one. There's like accessing the court system isn't extremely expensive. Sometimes you need maybe $10 to get the right documents, to file them, etc., even if you have a free lawyer. But often many people can't afford this. So poverty, health, and sorry, what was the last one?
Inequality.
Inequality. Yes, inequality. Yeah, inequality is the last one. So in terms of accessibility, in terms of access to justice, health, poverty, and inequality are barriers for people to accessing justice. And it's the responsibility of the state and the judiciary system to combat this. And a lot of NGOs work in this. If you see any organization saying they're doing legal aid, this is the kind of work they're doing. Work such as people who are married, who have illegitimate children, they are obligated by the laws of the country to provide some sort of financial support for these people, for the children and the family outside of this marriage. And these people often don't have the right kind of education or knowledge because of inequality and poverty to get something that's legally theirs as a right. And that's the kind of legal aid work I did earlier. And if you're interested in that, you should really look into it, especially in terms of access to justice. So when the justice system is functioning, you have to look at who can actually access it in the society.
Great, great. Thank you so much for that question. We have a question coming in from, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Pranto from Cohort 5. He's having technical difficulties, so he can't ask his question himself. So I'll ask that for you. Do you know about any scholarships or financial aids which can help a student who's from a poor economic background to take part in foreign MUN conferences in physical form?
Thank you for that question. I don't know of any personally. I mean, the ones I had my parents and grandparents help pay for, so I'm very grateful for that. But that's why I started online MUN, because I couldn't access MUN in person. But being physically there is not the most important part. Actually participating and going through the cultural exchange, the educational aspect, the research aspect are what are most important. So I don't know any avenues for scholarships, but I know platforms to get the same experience completely for free.
Thank you, Pranta. I hope your question is answered. A question coming in from, again, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Zarina from Cohort 2. Zarina? Are you there?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. I'd like to ask, when making your policies, how do you tackle something specific without having to cover the different root problems it leads to? And how do you keep your advocacies from going too broad?
Oh, thank you, Zarina. That's a very interesting question. So it depends on the organization and its objectives, as well as who's funding them. So some of these can be extremely specific, and some of these can be very broad, which gives us at least some agency to decide which is the most important part of the problem we'd like to tackle. So let's say something like gender equality. When we were addressing this in Zimbabwe, like at a national level, we had to divide it into public spaces and private spaces. Not gender equality, gender-based violence, sorry. So if you're looking at gender-based violence gender-based violence and gender equality in a holistic manner, you'd say, okay, the Scandinavian countries are making leaps and strides in terms of gender equality. You know, they're the pantheons of this and kind of lead the way in how this should function. But this only applies in the public spheres. In the private spheres, I mean, Sweden and Norway have higher incidences of gender-based violence, especially from intimate partners and people who know each other than developing countries. So you'd find a country like Nicaragua has actually made more progress in gender-based violence, combating gender-based violence in private spaces than a highly developed society like Sweden. And when we make our policies, we take things like this into consideration. And we say, okay, so if we want to tackle this issue in this country, let's look at it holistically and comparatively, then analyze at which layers we can enter it. So this is called a multi-layered intervention. And these interventions look at things like, let's say we're looking at gender equality or gender-based violence. We look at things like socioeconomic opportunities, unemployment, education, livelihoods, safety and security, and access to education, right? And then when we're writing the policy, we make sure we look at which aspects we have the capacity to incorporate. And when I say capacity, I mean, do we have enough money to implement it on the scale we want to? Do we have enough staff and expertise to cover the workload needed in the time frame given? And if not, we target a different area. Because sometimes you do get overworked and overwhelmed because of the depth of these problems. So we'd rather solve a small part completely than partially solve the whole problem.
Thank you for that question, Zarina. We are just 10 minutes away from finishing, so we can take a question or two more. A question coming in from Iman from Cohort 5. Iman?
Hi, apologies for the background noise, but thank you so much for your inspiring talk. And my question is, as you've talked about different agencies, does that mean that not every job in the UN revolves around diplomacy? So personally, I'm interested in accountancy. Does that mean like I can still get a job in the UN because of my side interest in it as an organization?
Yes, definitely. I mean, accountancy doesn't disqualify you anything. Like, you have to think about it as, how can I describe it? Imagine was it a garden? No. Imagine the UN is one big puzzle, right? just because you don't fit in one part doesn't mean you can't fit in another. And in terms of skills, accountancy is a high skill, especially, I mean, with the UNODC, we deal with, in transnational organized crime pillar, we deal a lot with cybercrime, illicit financial flow of funds. And if your expert is in accountancy and maybe you do forensic accounting as one of your expertise, then you'll be very helpful, especially to the UN and member states in auditing and trying to capture how money is flowing in and out of a country when it seems legal, when there's actually something illegal, when there are illegal transactions going on, as well as advising governments and institutions on the kind of safety measures they can put in place in terms of how they deal with their finances, how they move money, how they receive money, how they spend money, how they document and track it. So studying accountancy won't exclude you at all. And like I said, it's about finding the right agency and their focus area and then going into that.
Thank you for that question. Another question from Parag. Parag from Cohort 5.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi, Kudzai. First of all, congratulations on achieving such great endeavors. And yeah, your story is very motivational and inspiring. So yeah, coming up to the question, I'm from India and I have attended 78 MUNs. And I am very much into human rights. My interest is in human rights and I am a human rights activist here in India. But I wish to work with the UN related to the human rights such as UNHRC. So do you have any approach on how I can get a job in UN?
Well, I'm not a thank you for the question, Parag. Well, I'm not a recruiter, so I don't determine who gets a job, but I can advise you on how to make yourself the best candidate. Firstly, I would say look at the work the UN is doing in your country and in your region in terms of human rights and the different agencies like UNODC works on human rights, UNHCR works on human rights, UNICEF works on human rights, ILO works on human rights, UN Women works on human rights. And those are just those multiple agencies. And within human rights, they work on different aspects of them. So I would encourage you to take your time and find out what the different areas you could engage in human rights, and then develop your skill set in that particular field of interest. Find out what the UN is doing, first of all, and the civil society organizations they're working for. Because for me, I worked for this backwards. I didn't try and work with the UN. I worked with the civil society organizations the UN was working with. I understood the kind of work they want to implement, the results they're looking for, how they want their reporting done and their tracking, how they measure the success of implementation. So I worked from the bottom up. I didn't try go from up and then try and work with civil society organizations, but rather I understood how the UN works with other people. And then once I became strong at that, I became more of value because I've got an understanding of how they want to work with their partners. And I also have enough skill and expertise to assist their program. So if you want to work in human rights with the UN, I would find out who they work with in your country and your region, what kind of work they do, how you can get involved, even if you're just volunteering for free, just to get an understanding and exposure, and then take it from there.
Thank you, Parag, for the question. Let's wrap it up with one last question from Molly, who's a mentor for Cohort 2, who asks about dealing with failure. So Molly, go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for taking my question. So I had a question about how you deal with programs that have failed or not developed. Like, how do you move forward after this happens? Thank you so much again.
Thank you for the question, Molly. That's an interesting question. Dealing with failure overall. If some of you in my talk last month, I spoke about the Chinese bamboo tree that takes 5 years to grow. And for those 5 years, it's underneath the soil. And you have to water it, you have to nurture it, you have to take care of it. And people will be watching what you're doing and you're working on this and nothing is moving. And you keep on giving it this care and attention. And then after 5 years, it grows up to 80 feet in 6 weeks. And this is how we deal with failure. Or rather how I deal with failure personally. I mean, I haven't had projects that have failed outright at all. Like all my projects continue in their implementation and they've been very successful. But working towards this, I've had opportunities where I've started something and it was picking up and suddenly nothing happened. Or rather the funding went away, or the partner was no longer interested, or because of a geopolitical situation, we had to leave it completely. And then failure, maybe let's say in my personal life, like when I tried to do my master's in 2017, I applied to a bunch of universities and I got in, and I applied for a bunch of scholarships. I got through the first round, the second round, third round interviews, and like things such as the Chevening scholarship, the offered scholarship. So I thought, okay, I've got 5 final round scholarship interviews. Surely I'm going to get one and this is all going to be taken care of. And I got none of them, like 0, like all rejected from all of them. And that didn't discourage me at all. It was quite hard to take in, but I had to look back into myself and say, okay, Kudzai, you got this close. And a lot of the people who ended up getting them were much older than me. And they were like, okay, Kudzai, you can always come back. You're still young. These people are a bit older, so the opportunity will be of more value to them. And I didn't really understand it, but I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep working at this. And then now, fast forward 3 years later, I'm going to apply for my master's again. And I think this time I'll definitely get it. But what I can say is I never stopped working on myself during that whole time. I never stopped trying to get better at what I do, trying to grow in my field, trying to help others grow in my field as well, and help others find opportunities or assist them or give advice, because that's a really important part, because it forces you to reflect on yourself as well as put yourself down at someone else's level and say, okay, if I was you, what would I want to hear?
And with that note of never giving up and trying your best to get to what you want to do, I'd like to wrap up this session. Thank you so much, Kudzai, for joining in. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you talk to us once again. And I am going to put the link to Kudzai's Global Summit talk on the chat. You can go ahead and look at that talk as well, where he went into a lot of detail of what he mentioned today on surface levels. And he talked about the Chinese bamboo tree and a lot of other motivational things. So do go and have a look at that YouTube video where you can find Kudzai's talk at the Global Summit. With that, thank you so much, delegates, for joining in. And Mr. Newman, if you're there, do you want to take a group shot?
I'm on my bike, so that's pretty much impossible.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Newman is on his bike for cycling for the SDGs. So thank you, Mr. Newman, for doing that. But yeah, thank you for joining in again.